All right, dear Heavenly Father in heaven, we come to you thankful and humble in your presence, and we just want to thank you for allowing us to have this Bible study once again. We ask that you help us learn something. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, so we're on Genesis 46, and here we go.
Jacob's journey to Egypt. So Jacob set out for Egypt with all his possessions. And when he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. During the night, God spoke to him in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, he called. Here I am, Jacob replied. I am God, the God of your father, the voice said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make your family into a great nation. I will go with you down to Egypt, and I will bring you back again. But you will die in Egypt with Joseph attending to you. So Jacob left Beersheba, and his sons took him to Egypt. They carried him and their little ones and their wives in the wagons Pharaoh had provided for them. They also took all their livestock and all the personal belongings they had acquired in the land of Canaan. So Jacob and his entire family went to Egypt, sons and grandsons, daughters and granddaughters, all his descendants. These are the names of the descendants of Israel, the sons of Jacob, who went to Egypt. Reuben was Jacob's oldest son. The sons of Reuben were Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. The sons of Simeon were Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul. Shaul's mother was a Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The sons of Judah were Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah, though and Onan had died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Issachar were Tola, Pua, Jashub, and Shimron. The sons of Zebulun were Sered, Elon, and Jalil. These were the sons of Leah and Jacob who were born in Padan Aram, in addition to their daughter Dinah. The number of Jacob's descendants, male and female, through Leah was 33. The sons of Gad were Zephon, Haggai, Shunai, Esbon, Eri, Eradai, and Arli. The sons of Asher were Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah. Their sister was Sirah. Beriah's sons were Heber and Malkiel. These were the sons of Zilpah, the servant given to Leah by her father Laban. The number of Jacob's descendants through Zilpah was 16. The sons of Jacob's wife Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph's sons, born in the land of Egypt, were Manasseh and Ephraim. Their mother was Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On. Benjamin's sons were Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppim, Huppim, and Ard. These were the sons of Rachel and Jacob. The number of Jacob's descendants through Rachel was 14. The son of Dan was Husham. The sons of Naphtali were Jazeel, Guni, Jezer, and Shillem. These were the sons of Bilhah, the servant given to Rachel by her father Laban. The number of Jacob's descendants through Bilhah was 7. The total number of Jacob's direct descendants who went with him to Egypt, not counting his sons' wives, was 66. In addition, Joseph had 2 sons who were born in Egypt. So altogether, there were 70 members of Jacob's family in the land of Egypt. Jacob's
All right.
So I'll start with, you wanted to start?
Yeah, you can.
Verse 1, we always talk about just recognizing God. He said he came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to God his father. And then God comes to him in a vision. God tells him it's okay to go to Egypt. And then he gives him a prophecy. He says, verse 4 says, I will go with you down to Egypt and I will bring you back again. You will die in Egypt, but Joseph will be there and close your eyes. So he talks about the Exodus when he says, I will bring you back again.
I want to put I just wanted to reiterate something we already know, that a man of God doesn't make a move without confirmation from God or provision from God. So like that's a good thing for me to eat on, is like anytime you're gonna make a big move, even a small move, it's a good habit to look up to the Father and get confirmation, like a dream. You know what I'm saying? Something that confirms it's okay, I can go this place. So that's what I see with Jacob.
Because there's a Bible verse about that. Um, it is Psalms 37:23. You read that one because it goes to what you just said. Yeah.
You said Psalms
Psalms 37 verses 23. It's probably I don't have that one on my wall.
Psalms 37 verses.
You can read the NLT and the NKG. 37 verse 23.
It says, "The Lord directs the steps of the godly. He delights in every detail of their lives." And then NKJV says, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. He delights in his way." So that makes sense.
The thing is, you're going to see that with Abraham, God was the one who ordained the steps. You're going to see that with Moses going to Egypt to go rescue the Israelites. God ordained those steps. Peter going to Cornelius' house, God ordained those steps. All throughout the scriptures, you're going to see Jonah going to Nineveh, God ordained his steps. The reality, Joshua going to walk around the walls of Jericho, God ordained his steps. So the truth is, whenever you see in the scriptures, Samuel going to anoint David, God ordained the step. The reality is God doesn't change. And that's something you see is symmetrical all throughout the scripture, is the steps of a righteous man are always ordered by God. Okay. And another thing we see in verses 2, it says, during the night, God spoke to him in a vision, and he says, "Jacob, Jacob." And it's just whenever you see something twice, that is a decree. And we know that because Joseph said that to the king when he interpreted his dreams. Joseph said to him, as to the reason you had two of the similar dreams, it's a decree, which means, and you see that he says, "Jacob, Jacob" here. With Moses, he's going to say Moses, Moses. With Samuel, he's going to say Samuel, Samuel. With Saul, who is Paul, he says Saul, Saul. One thing you see is when God speaks, whether he calls your name or in a vision, sometimes you will see in a vision sense, he will show you something twice, which is confirmation. But in this sense, when he says your name twice, that is a way to know that it is God speaking. And we see that. And he says, "I'm the God of your father," which I thought was interesting because in the very first verse, it says in the second sentence, "And when he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac." What I think is very important for fathers to understand is your God 90% of the time will be your child's God. Now, the only reason I say 90 is because, like, if your dad was not worshiping God and worshiping some false God, I give grace for the 10% that some kid guy can say, no, he's going to be mine. But 90% of the time, the God you choose to serve is the God your child will serve, because he's going to walk in the steps of his dad. And you see that with Abraham to Isaac, from Isaac to Jacob, all the way, and so on. So it emphasizes he offers sacrifice to the God of his father. So as fathers, we have to make sure that our children, see us worshiping God. They see us living this thing out. Because if you do a good job representing, God, and you and your wife do that, then your children will be godly. And I want to read a verse of Malachi to validate that point. In Malachi, it's chapter 3. I want to read Malachi chapter 3. Where is it at? Okay, I'll start at verses 10. So, like, the point is, it said that he was offering sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And the thing is, you as a father, what you do is going to be a representation to your children of who to serve. It's going to be a representation of are you fake, whatever. The reality is their chances of serving God and living a life where they sacrifice their life to God is going to be based on what they see from you. And Malachi chapter 2, actually, verses 10, forgive me. It says, are we not all children of the same Father? Are we not all created by the same God? Then why do we betray each other, violating the covenant of our ancestors? It says, Judah has been unfaithful, and a detestable thing has been done in Israel and in Jerusalem. The men of Judah have defiled the Lord's beloved sanctuary by marrying women who worship idols. May the Lord cut off from the nation of Israel every last man who has done this and yet brings an offering to the Lord of heaven's armies. Here is another thing you do. You cover the Lord's altars with tears, weeping, and groaning because he pays no attention to your offering and doesn't accept them with pleasure. You cry out, why doesn't the Lord accept my worship? I'll tell you why. Because the Lord witnessed the vows you and your wife made when you were young, but you have been unfaithful to her, though she remained your faithful partner, the wife of your marriage vows. Didn't the Lord make you one with your wife? In body and spirit, you are his. And what does he want? Here it is, godly children from your union. So guard your heart, remain loyal to your wife of your youth, for I hate divorce. So godly children come from a union that is in order with how God's word commands us to live. So in conclusion, he was offering sacrifices to the God of his father, Isaac, which goes to show you Isaac did a good job of being a representation. So his son continued in his footsteps. So as men who are not just husbands, but also fathers, it's not just about you when you're living out this Christian walk. You're setting an example for your son.
Yeah, that's very true.
So the rest of it says Jacob left Beersheba, took his sons to Egypt, took his livestock, personal belongings. And then it goes into the descendants. Do you guys have anything for that?
The only thing I would add is when you have favor, everyone that is linked to you, at least from a personal, because we know Jacob in this time, from as we've read in the scripture, in the book of Genesis, for the most part, we know him and all his family members were living together, because when they went to tell him Joseph was gone, you're going to see when they go to Egypt, their dad's the one who sends them to go get the food. So as it seems, is his household consisted of his children and his children's children. So the only thing I would add is you see, because the favor of the Lord was upon Jacob, his children benefited from that. God didn't just say to Jacob, you're going to go to Egypt and it's just you. It's him and all his descendants, his wife's kids, his kids' kids, you know, their servants. And you see basically everyone that was linked to Jacob at this particular time where he lived, in terms of his family members, they all were saved. And you see the same thing happens with Rahab. And the story of Rahab was the one who hid the two spies. Notice that. But the favor of the Lord wasn't just for her, not just her parents, her siblings, her cousins, her uncles. They all ate from her favor and that grace because of her. So the only thing I would add is, again, this is why it's so important, you know, as men, as fathers, as husbands, when you're living in accordance to God's will, your wife will benefit from that. Your children will benefit from that. Your cousin will benefit from that. The grace that's on Max's life, well, I'm linked to him. The grace that's on Stanley's life, I'm linked to you. So the reality is there's grace that I can get that's on you because you're doing the right thing. God said, that's why I say pray for me, because God may honor a prayer you pray because of the grace that's on your life. So as we're seeing here, his family is going to benefit from him. The same thing with Noah. So I think that's the only thing I would add is grace and favor upon an individual never is for that individual alone. It's for people linked to him. And that's good news for all of us.
Okay. The overflow.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have anything else for this portion of the descendants?
I just like how it says these are the names of the descendants of Israel. So it shows you like this is where kind of Israel branches from.
I think we spoke about like our grandfather kind of being Israel for us. So I think we spoke about how the impact, you don't know the impact, the decisions you make, you don't know how it impacts 50 years from now. And the decision our grandfather made an impact of how many families? More than 100 people.
It's
So,
huge.
so when you see the descendants of Israel, you're gonna see Reuben, you're gonna see all these sons, and then their sons, and their sons,
Mhm.
all from a decision that Abraham made, Isaac made, and Jacob made.
Yeah, man. That's good news to know that like you choose to follow the Lord. It's not only good for you and your household, but the generations after you. That's really good to know. There's a Bible verse that says, raise a child up the way he should be, and he will never depart from it, I believe.
Proverbs.
So
Yes.
that is very true.
I think there should be oh, I think we can go to the next portion.
But the rest of it was just descendants, right?
Yes.
Pretty much.
Full number of days. So it was basically 66 direct descendants.
And just to add to that point, like when people start to just grow in spiritual maturity, that is impacting hundreds of people's lives. Like once we started to take this stuff serious, whether we know it or not, hundreds of people's lives are going to be impacted. Not because we're impacting them directly, but because the fact that we made a decision that's going to change the course of time, just by living our lives a certain way, and our kids and our kids' kids and our kids' kids, it's just going to keep transferring. So whenever somebody makes a decision to start growing spiritually or accept Jesus, hundreds of lives are changing.
Yeah. To your point, it's also like to Jared's point as well, is just the people connected to you too. Like you can you already have relation with them. So now it's gonna be like they're gonna see a change in your life, they're gonna see overflow in your life, and they're gonna more likely want to know
Yeah,
who.
you see that with the story of Joseph at Potiphar's house. Potiphar quickly realized, I better put this guy in charge because there's a favor on this guy. Same thing with Jacob. His uncle Laban says, "Yo, there's this guy showed up and things are changing." So yeah, people in close proximity. But the verse is Proverbs 22 verses 6. Direct your children onto the right path, and when they are older, they will not leave it. And I think one thing to add to that, I mean, to emphasize with this verse, a lot of people miss it, is when they're older, they won't depart. Kids are going to go through a phase of what we call teenage years. And in teenage years, they're experimenting. They're like, what does my parents know? But when they get to that place of maturity, they're going to come back to what you taught them. So I'd say don't panic if at that 14 to 18 range, it's like, whoa, he's not doing what I taught him. Give him till he's like 20, and you're going to see a turnaround. He's going to recognize everything dad said is legit, and diverse will be
like the
true. That's what I emphasize to the kids that I teach on Monday, because I spoke to them last week. I was like, guys, I know you're not going to shoot 100. Like we're here, you feel me? We're here to really help you, and I know most of the stuff you're not going to listen to, because I know when I was little and they were telling me good stuff, and ultimately you're going to make decisions. But I want you to be conscious of those decisions. Like,
yeah, planting.
I planted a seed, so it's not as easy to do. And not only that, when you do get burned, you're like, oh,
Now you know it's a true. It's a truth.
yeah, this is why he said not to do that. This is why you know what I mean? So like when you plant that seed in a kid, like you said, I mean, at the end of the day, they have to make decisions. But the good thing is when you plant the seed and it becomes harder to do, and not only because now they have to question it, and not only that, when if they do it, there is more reinforcement and remembering, oh, now I get it, now I understand, you feel me, what he was trying to say. So that's a part of the growth, and that's why we need to continue to encourage, because our encouragement, we may not think it's working, but it is working. It's just going to work in the long run.
That's facts. Because like you said, it's a seed. That's facts.
Mm-hmm.
That's facts.
Or if you plant a seed in the ground you can't expect it to grow overnight.
That's
You know what I'm
facts.
Especially
saying?
with kids, man. I mean, they deal with a lot. It's tough to be a kid, but ultimately, I think it's just like once they seen it, once you showed it to them and they seen it, now they have a better understanding. But if you never showed it to them, I mean, if you never told it to them and they seen it, then they don't really have something to like compare it to,
That's
Mhm.
facts.
and that's why they keep falling into the same mistake again and again.
Right, because they don't have no light. They don't have no
Exactly.
light. No. So yeah, for sure. I guess if there's nothing else, we could tackle the next section. There we go.
Family arrives in Goshen. As they neared their destination, Jacob sent Judah ahead to meet Joseph and get directions to the region of Goshen. And when they finally arrived there, Joseph prepared his chariot and traveled to Goshen to meet his father Jacob. When Joseph arrived, he embraced his father and wept, holding him for a long time. Finally, Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen your face again and know you are still alive." And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's entire family, "I will go to Pharaoh and tell him, 'My brothers and my father's entire family have come to me from the land of Canaan. These men are shepherds and they raise livestock. They have brought with them their flocks and herds and everything they own.'" Then he said, "When Pharaoh calls for you and asks you about your occupation, you must tell him, 'We, your servants, have raised livestock all our lives, as our ancestors have always done.' When you tell him this, he will let you live here in the region of Goshen, for the Egyptians despise shepherds."
And this is interesting because it's
Chapter
like
40.
Jared's gonna
Listen.
go through this phase of having a son, and it's just like when it says that they seen each other and they just embrace each other and they wept. I just like had a flashback on like putting myself in that position, and I was just like, wow, like, dang, that's
Mm.
crazy. You feel me? His son went through so much, and that's why, like, I mean, as a father of a son, it's just like, yo, like, it's that's a lot to take in, and it's just like until you like put yourself in that position, you don't really understand the text. You feel me?
Mm.
That's true.
Mm. Even like the prodigal son, I guess that's true. If you don't have a son, you
Prodigal
have
son.
children, you can't relate because it says he saw his son in the distance and he felt compassion and he hugs him
Yeah,
and
it's just like
embraces
that
him. And
unconditional. And it's just like when I read that, I was just like, dang, like I understand it because it's just like, yeah, man, like it's just like that relationship, especially then they were close. And he says, finally, now I'm ready to die because like that relationship is just different, man.
That's so true. Cause there's times I'm reading the Bible and then like you read the verse, God loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, and I only have one son. I'm like, now I get it, bro. How much it hurt him. Cause like imagine for me like to do that. Oh man. So like I'm like, all right, that was a sacrifice. That was huge. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And then if you ever adopted, right, someone, a child, you start to see how he adopts, you know, us into his family. So like all of that stuff, it's easier to like understand it when
And that's
you
what, yeah. And that's
you
kind of
go
why
through.
he uses certain terms and he uses parables to help you to understand the dynamic of it. You feel
Mhm.
me? So like to help you understand what's going on.
And then another thing, I've heard, where they're on their deathbed and they're like, they won't go until they see this one person. And then when they see that one person, they're like, all right. And then they actually like, they go. And I'm like, can you hold on to your spirit or something? Because like, you see that with Jacob, he's like, you know what I'm saying? He's like, now I'm
but
ready.
I see that more metaphorically in a sense, but literal though, in a sense at the same time. In the sense that when he says, "Now I'm ready to die," because he wasn't on his deathbed here. He's gonna end up living another couple, like
Oh,
maybe.
okay, okay.
Yeah, this isn't on his deathbed because you're gonna read when we go further that he's gonna end up living at least in Egypt. I believe it's like 10+ years. So
Okay,
it's just
so
an,
it's like,
it's metaphoric. Like now, like no matter what happens, now I'm good.
I'm
It's
good.
kind of like
okay, so he's like, before I was like, nah, I gotta live until I see
yeah,
him. But like,
exactly.
you,
But now, if I die today, I'm cool. Like I got that one thing I was like
yeah,
yearning for.
no, that makes
And
sense.
and one thing you said at the end of this, it says in Joseph in verses 31, it says, and Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's entire family, I will go to Pharaoh and tell him, my brothers and my father's entire family have come to me from the land of Canaan. These men are shepherds and raise livestock. They have brought with them their flocks and herds and everything they own. Then he said, when Pharaoh calls for you and asks you about your occupation, you must tell him, we, your servants, have raised livestock all our lives, as our ancestors have always done. When you tell him this, he will let you live here in the region of Goshen, for the Egyptians despise shepherds. So you see, and it's going to tell us that Goshen was one of the best parts of Egypt, right? And the reason they're going to be able to live in Goshen is because the Egyptians despise shepherds, which means because they despise shepherds, the part where the Egyptians are, you won't be able to stay here if you're a shepherd. If you are a shepherd, you got to go to another part. But notice the part they're going to go to is actually the best part of the land, but that's not even the part I want to emphasize. It's the fact that their occupation was something that they learned and took serious. Sometimes in a season, God can ask you to do something and you think it's insignificant, but in another season, that'll be the very thing you need. That'll be the very thing you need for that door to open. You know, if Joseph wasn't a shepherd boy, he wouldn't have qualified to take out Goliath. How do I say that? Through being a shepherd's boy, he's going to encounter lions and bears that are going to try to steal his little sheep. And now he's going to risk his own life to fight a lion and a bear. And he talks about how God delivered him from the hand of the lion, the mouth of the lion, the hand of the bear. So now he done gain experience fighting an animal that strong. When he sees Goliath, through my occupation and taking it serious, I can take Goliath because God was with me when I was getting against the lion and up against the bear. So the point we take is whatever God is asking you to do in season, do it. Because even Jesus said, to those who are doing well, even much more will be given to you. Meaning when you cultivate what God has put in your hand, you max it out. There's doors that will open down the line because of that thing that you maxed out. Like you said, God said, focus on coding, max it out. Because in the next season, maybe something you learned in coding will open a door for you in the next season. So people have to understand. That's why I said, if you look at your life with spiritual eyes, you will not take things for granted. You will not go to work and say, this job again. No, go with the right attitude, max out. Because that might be the very thing that you're going to need in the next season. And you see it here. It's going to open a door for them. But that's all I got for that.
That's
Yep,
funny
if
you
you have
said.
a-
I told my wife the same things, like with the job shit. Like, yeah, man, like, you know, you might be going through something that isn't pleasant right now, but just push through it and try to learn something in the season because it might be some pivotal for the next season. So, and that's the same thing with me, like you said, like I'm going through my work and I'm just putting my best foot forward. And you never know, like if you'll gain all these skills from all this work you're putting in, and then the next season you'll be like, dude, I really needed that. So 100% agree with that.
Yeah, and like you said, man, if they had a bad attitude and they slacked off, you see a lot of people with talent, they they don't have the work ethic, they have bad attitudes, they slack because they're thinking in the now, and
Mhm.
then 5 years from now, we're like, yo, we need your gift. And you're like, dang, I didn't cultivate it. And you're
Mhm.
useless at that point. Like if they were not talented and something they were supposed to be talented in this season, they would have been screwed. So, like you said, man, stay still in the season and do your best in the position God put you, and try not to think about like what it's supposed to be. To be like, yo, this is where I'm at, and I'm gonna be 100% where I'm at. And God, when He moves, you'll be ready.
And I learned that like when I read this, the reason why what I said hits home for me is because I was talking to my mom the other day. I was like, yo, at the church I'm at, like the Spanish people rent from us. And the thing is, I don't speak Spanish, but I wish I did. And I went to high school. I took Spanish 4 years, but I slacked off. I was a class clown the first two, and then, but I didn't know down the line God was going to connect me with Spanish
Good
ministry.
example.
Now I'm
Mhm.
telling my mom, like, yo, because the Spanish people let me preach one time, but I had to preach to a translator, and it pissed me off because, like, when someone translates, it kind of throws off your rhythm. And it's like, dang, if I would have took those years serious for 4 years of Spanish, and then after high school kept it going, by today I would have been fluent. But I slacked off, not knowing that down the line I might need this. So I read this saying, yeah, whatever you're doing in the now, understand that there's something you're doing in the now that's actually an investment for the future. So even when you talk about what we're doing for Christ now, Jesus says there's rewards that he says, in Matthew 6, there's rewards that await you when you're giving to the poor, when you're sacrificing your time for God. There's actually a reward down the line. And then the person who says, I don't need to believe in Jesus, well, you're also making an investment too, buddy, for the next life. You're going to burn in the flames of hell. If you stay the way you are. So the reality is, in the now, you're making an investment for the future. Everything you're doing in the now, in a sense, is an investment for the future. So hone in.
And that's just like I said, we have so much talented people that are not cultivating. And this is a good message to them. Yo, man, you have a talent in drawing, you have a talent in music, you have a talent in all these things, and you're just sitting on it, man. Yo, we're gonna need that in the future.
But I think that's the thing when you don't read the Bible. Because I think because we read the Bible, there's a perspective that we can see in certain things, like you just said. Like I tell my wife that all the time. Is like, you might think the gift of drawing is like, what the heck? But if God gave it to you, understand in this season that gift might seem so irrelevant. But because, for example, a great example, okay, COVID. I remember me and my wife joked about this. Can you imagine, Max, some 20 years ago, the person who made the mask, it's like this dumb invest. People are probably, that's a dumb invest. That's a dumb freaking thing to make a freaking face mask. What money is he gonna make with that cheap little thing? But then you didn't know that down the line, COVID was gonna happen, and everyone and their dad was looking for masks. And now the person who made the mask, he gets the last laugh because he stewarded well in the season when God just said make the mask. People laugh at him and say that's a dumb, and like, well, who's gonna use that? Well, you'll see. And down the line, everyone in the world needed it. So you see, if you steward well in the now, in the future, man, it'll pay off, man.
100%. That's a good message, man, for sure.
And I was trying to find a verse in Ecclesiastes. I've been reading that book lately. And there was a verse that was like, the things you find to do excellent now, do it now before you give your spirit up.
That's Ezekiel. It's Ezekiel chapter 12. He was talking to the youth. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Solomon was talking to the young people. That's in Ecclesiastes chapter 12. If you start at verses 5, start around verses 5 to verses 12. 5 to 7.
Yeah, it's like, remember him before you become fearful of falling and worrying about danger in the streets before your hair.
What you want, that's it. 5 to 7. Mainly verses 6 is what you're looking for.
Yeah. It was like the 6 says, yes, remember your creator now while you are young, before the silver cord of life snaps and the golden bowl is broken. Don't wait until the water jar is smashed, as the spring and the pulley is broken at the well, for then the dust will return to the earth and the spirit will return to the God who gave it. And I love this book, man, because it's like, it brings everything back to perspective. Like, whenever you're doing something, don't look at it as a problem. It's an opportunity. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's an opportunity to do something, because at some point you ain't gonna be able to do anything. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I look at it in that lens. Like, it's an honor to serve for God. It's an honor to cultivate your gifts, because in the end, there's gonna be a time. Think about an hourglass. You have an hourglass, it's ticking.
Yeah.
So once it's gone, and
Gone.
you can't look back and be like, I wish I would have.
Yeah,
Nah,
man.
it's
And we got
over.
a lot of geniuses sitting on the couch, bro. Smart people, creative people. Seriously, like when you think about I always think about this. What if LeBron just ate chips all day?
Dude, come on.
Like what a waste of a
Dude, that
trajectory.
with
You feel me? What if
course.
what if Tom Brady quit? You feel me? And
Yeah,
like
nah.
you feel me? Like the talent that was able to be cultivated. I think a lot of people have that talent. They just haven't cultivated it. You feel me?
Because
That's
you
great.
have to have the right perspective. Like a lot
Facts.
of
That's
people,
facts.
it's mentality. Like a lot of people, they have the skills. It's just they don't see
But I
how
think it goes. I think that's something that we talked about when you have kids is you can't make it too easy because what you just said, Stanley, is facts. The mentality Brady has is like, yo, they didn't pick me. You know, the mentality Michael has is, yo, you cut me, guy. Like, yo, I'm MJ. Even though no one knew at the time he's MJ, he believes, yo, I'm MJ. You cut me, bro.
exactly.
LeBron, my dad's not here. I got to get my mom out the projects. So the reality is, I think, your mindset and the mentality has to be there because when the mentality's there, especially if you have God, that's even more of a thing that gives you perspective. But I think a lot of what Max said is true. A lot of people are on the couch who are geniuses, but to what you said, mentality and then also perspective that they don't have with spiritual eyes. And I think, yeah, I agree with you, man. I agree with that.
So, like, I was reading that, I was like, man, if there's nothing else, man, it's just that it's opportunity. There's people who are in a wheelchair that wish they could do things you're doing, like stuff like that. Like in
It's
the
tough to
end,
realize that when you're young, and that's why I love that verse. Because I remember Uncle Simpson told me, man, while you're young, do it, do all of it, do
yeah, like
everything.
go
And
in.
that hit home for me. I'm like, yo, you're right. Because once you start to have kids, it slows down, bro.
Right. So like take advantage of it and give it.
Take
And
advantage of
this
your
is how
youth.
I see it. In any season you're in, pour your heart out. You have like
Yeah,
JR, you
sense of
have a
urgency.
sermon you're about to preach, pour your whole soul in that thing. Whatever it is, Max in the ministry of kids, pour your soul. You know what I'm saying? Like anything you're doing.
Because down the line, it's an investment that, can come back and you say, man, I'm happy I planted those seeds because now I'm seeing the fruits.
Exactly. But
I think
that's
that's it.
pretty much it, yeah. So we'll go
Let's take 47.
Chapter 47. Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Then Joseph went to see Pharaoh and told him, my father and my brothers have arrived from the land of Canaan. They have come with all their flocks and herds and possessions, and they are now in the region of Goshen. Joseph took 5 of his brothers with him and presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh asked the brothers, what is your occupation? They replied, we, your servants, are shepherds, just like our ancestors. We have come to live here in Egypt for a while, for there is no pasture for our flocks in Canaan. The famine is very severe there, so please, we request permission to live in the region of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, now that your father and brothers have joined you here, choose any place in the entire land of Egypt for them to live. Give them the best land of Egypt. Let them live in the region of Goshen. And if any of them have special skills, put them in charge of my livestock too. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. How old are you? Pharaoh asked him. Jacob replied, I have traveled this earth for 130 hard years, but my life has been short compared to the lives of my ancestors. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh again before leaving his court. So Joseph assigned the best land of Egypt, the region of Ramesses, to his father and his brothers, and he settled them there just as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided food for his father and his brothers in amounts appropriate to the number of their dependents, including the smallest children.
It's good.
Okay. So from the top,
I think that we just spoke about that. Verse 2 and 3 says, "What is your occupation?" And then they say what Joseph tells them to say. And then verse 5, 6, he says, "Choose any place in the entire land of Egypt for them to live. Give them the best land in Egypt. Let them live in the region of Goshen. And if any of them have special skills, put them in charge of my livestock too." And it goes back to our point, man. If you weren't cultivating that special, it wasn't a special skill that you were cultivating, he would have looked at you like, "Damn, like I ain't got nothing for you." But he's like, "Oh, you're good at this. You can draw. You can sing. You're good at math. You're a good speaker. Let me put you here. I have a position for you." So we have to remember to cultivate in our seasons.
mhm,
And everybody's good at something. We're not good at everything. So that's why it's always good to leverage people. Like I said when we were speaking earlier, like I have a dietitian friend. I'm like, "Yo, I'm in the season of changing up my diet. You study diet. You study diet. So like I want to like get that information from you." And that's important, man. We need we need that help from each other.
I agree.
yeah.
I agree.
That's the beauty of like whatever you do it with excellence.
Excellent.
Because it's just you're gonna walk into opportunity. Opportunity is gonna be all around you. It's inevitable. You know what I'm saying? But if you do things just to gain and not be, like if you're doing things just for the money or this and that, you're not gonna be who you're supposed to be. You know what I'm saying? But if you have the mentality, anything I do, I'm gonna leave it better off than it was before I left, or every time I go in, I'm gonna give it my all. Then you're gonna see that you're a person of value, of skill, of importance, and like an important vessel for God, even because like God's like I could use this person because like any task I send him to do, he's gonna do it properly. You know what I'm saying? It's a good habit to have. And you can see
that's true. That's true.
like Pharaoh, you go to the highest of highest. I think there's a Bible verse about that, but
Oh yeah, I'm getting it for you right now.
but you go to the highest of highest places.
Proverbs 22, my brother. The Bible doesn't lie. Proverbs 22, 29. You know, brother JR is going to get the scripture, brother. Proverbs 22, verse 29. Proverbs 22, 29, man. The Bible doesn't lie, man. This is a living book.
So
this is before Solomon's time.
Proverbs 22, 29 says, "Do you see any truly competent workers? They will serve kings rather than work for ordinary people." There you go. That's 100% right.
Because when you have to think about it, for a king's palace to be governed and run at such order and success, he has to have the best of the best.
Oh yeah, 100%.
He has to have the best of the best singers, the best nurses, the best doctors, the best dietitians to max point, the best cooks, the best everything. So this is why people don't understand. If you don't maximize what God has put in your hands, you're gonna always be at Walmart. People want to go to another level, but they're not willing to.
You got doctors flipping burgers, bro, and they don't even know it. You got nurses like that Walmart cashiers, like, and that's not a bad job, but what I'm trying to say is their potential is so much higher, and they're not realizing it.
100%.
I think going back to Stanley's point, and that's something I always like think back to, not to do things for money, because if you're doing things for money, then you will never really like if in this moment you're not receiving the money, you're not going to do it.
Right.
Like
it's not rooted in something that's sustainable.
Like Jamarcus Russell, right? What's his name? His name's Jamarcus. So like, he's working hard through college. Like he's doing 2 days. He's impressing scouts. As soon as he signed the contract, he's done. He got what he wanted. So that means you worked for the money, you got it, and now your efforts you start going downhill. That's why you see
Exactly.
a bunch of athletes or whoever the case is. You see how they are going. They are so driven to get to something. They get it, and then they start to decline.
Yep.
The reason they're
And
declining is because they got what they want.
The foundation was wrong.
Exactly.
exactly. And the point of doing it, like when I got into real estate, I didn't know you could make money. You feel me? And when I got into like doing radio, I did it for the wrong reason. I was like, I want to do this in the NBA. But it's just what my point is, if you're doing it for fame or money and you don't receive it, you're gonna stop doing it.
That's facts.
But
100%.
if you're doing it because this is what you feel like you're in it for, and whether I make money or not, I'm good, then you'll stick into it. And I think a lot of people want the fame and the fortune, and because they don't receive it, they stop doing it.
Or when they receive it, they switch
Or
up. Like,
vice versa, when they receive it,
it's like
they stop doing it
LeBron
too.
James is the number one. Like him and Tom Brady,
Yeah, him and Brady.
bro. How they've been paid the most. They got the most accolades. They got it all. But guess what? They keep working.
Yeah.
It's a part of who they are.
It tells you their motive from the get-go, their foundation was solid.
Exactly. He's like
Tom Brady comes from a successful family. He didn't need to do the NFL for money.
exactly.
Exactly. It's like
He doesn't need
that's what
the
I'm
money.
saying. It's like whether I make it pro or not, I just love the game. That's the
just love the
mentality
game.
that's gonna keep you in it. But if it's about money and then you feel like you're not gonna make it to the league, you're gonna tend to quit because you're like, well, I'm not gonna make it to the fame and the fortune, so I don't want to do it. It's like you didn't love the game then. You feel me?
100%.
And that's what I started to learn, and that's what I'm going to start to teach people. Like, yo, if you say you want to do something, ask them why they want to do it. You feel me? And if they don't get that, well, they still want to do it. You feel me? Like, I want to play basketball. Why? Because I want to make it to the league. I want to make all this money. What if you only play college? What if you don't make it to the league? And I don't want to. I'm not gonna do it. Nah. If I told you right now you wouldn't make it to the league, would you still keep playing? Nah.
Yeah.
All right. So then this is probably not what's
to
for you.
piggyback off what you're saying. That means you should only do things because you love to do it.
Exactly.
Like if I'm gonna work for the kingdom, I gotta do it because I love to work for God. Because that's what's
exactly
going. No matter what, like when I played football, I did it because I loved the game. I loved football. And I just stopped because I wasn't as talented or I got injured or whatever. But in the end, it's all about the love and then, giving your best.
Because the funny part is I realized that for myself when I was like broadcasting games. Because I interned at a radio station and they were doing like small time high school games. I'm like, I'm trying to do NBA games. What you mean? But they've been doing high school games for 5 to 10 years. So my thing was like, oh, I don't really love broadcasting. I really want it so I can do it at the high, like at the NBA level. And if I can't do it at the NBA level, then I don't want to do it. So then I was like, oh, okay, so this is not for you. Because if you said to me, you're not going to make it, would you keep doing it? And I was like,
that's
hey, there's your answer.
That's a good way of putting it. I actually, I'm gonna use that for like,
because there's no guarantee you're gonna make it to the. And like I said, those guys, they've been in 10 years doing high school games, 10 years, and they love it. And that's the people that should be doing it. And if you do get elevated, then more power to you.
And that's the reason why to be like, when you talk about being someone who works for King, you have to love your work. And I think what you said is a great analogy. These guys doing the high school basketball game, they've been here 5, 10 years, but because they love it, they keep doing it. But those are the guys who will eventually be elevated to the NBA. It's like a referee. You're refereeing
Exactly.
a high school game. It's like, bro, really, ref? You could be picking up overtime at your day job. Just screw it.
Exactly.
But it's like, no, but I'm here because I love to do this. And he's not just here, like he's lackadaisical. He's not here just, he's really like refing, like he's
really
refing LeBron. You know what I mean? But because you're repping like that, you're gonna get noticed. And the reality is, this is why you have to fall. But what Stanley said, I agree with as well, is having that the perspective, from God, it allows you to fall in love with your work, because that's biblical. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting at verses 24, you're talking about Solomon, the wisest man, after Jesus, who ever walked this planet. He talks about Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 24. He says, "So I decided there is nothing better than to enjoy food and drink, and look at this, and to find satisfaction in work. Then I realized that these pleasures are from the hand of God." So the reality is, when you hone in on your work, Jesus says in John 4:34, "My nourishment comes from doing the will of God." So if you put those two and sandwich it together, okay, if I'm in a relationship with God, I know God's call on my life is, okay, I'm supposed to be a pastor. I know God's call on my life is I'm supposed to be a doctor. Well, now that I know the will of God for my life, put what Solomon says, I'm gonna fall in love with this thing. And like Max's point out, whether God's going to make me a pastor of a mega church or a small church, well, I know the will of God for my life, and I'm applying what Solomon said and falling in love with my work, because this is a pleasure that comes from the hand of God. If you do that, now you sandwich those two over time, like a Joseph. Joseph had a dream. He was supposed to be in this big position, but he's at Potiphar's house. But guess what? He hones in. I know I had that dream. Maybe it's not going to happen, but at Potiphar's house, I'm going to give it my all. And what happens? Oh man, this guy's great. Put him in charge of the house. Now elevate him. But notice, he's at Potiphar's house, not saying, "Yo, God, what about the dream?" No. I don't know about the dream, but I'm a hone in. I'm gonna fall in love with my work. And he fell in love with his work. He knew the will of God for his life, and he stayed consistent. And before you knew it, he was serving a king. My God, my God.
And to your point, that referee that's been doing it for 10 years at a high level, if he keeps it up and he's getting better and better and better, he has more likely to be elevated, because he's not going to be like the quitter. You feel me? He's not going to quit when it gets hard. And that's the thing about adversity. Adversity is a test. Typically, the quitters are going to quit when it gets hard.
When it gets hard.
You feel me? And you have to love it to do it when it's hard. You have to love it. And that's the thing about real estate. To do real estate, you have to be able to do it when it's hard. And a lot of people are going to quit when it gets hard because they didn't really want to do it for real. They just wanted the fame that came with it.
The thing is, like, the people who stick around is like, win, lose, or draw, I'm gonna be content as long as I gave my 100% effort. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I actually love what I'm doing because I get an opportunity to do it. And then win, lose, or draw, I'm okay because I gave it my all. You know what I'm saying? And if you do that, you can stick with it because your intentions are right. Exactly. When your intentions are wrong, you're gonna quit. Easy.
But to keep it in point, you won't serve someone of value, because the reality is, like I said, if you sandwich what Jesus says in John 4:34 and what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, the reality is you need to know God's will for your life. When you know God's will for your life, you're gonna fall in love with whatever He has asked you to do in season. God, you want me to ref at a freaking kids game for 10 years? I'll do that. I don't care. That's what your will is for me. And because you have that mentality, when there's two freaking parents in the stands, when it's raining, you're still out here. When we can't pay you this year, you're still out here. Now you've been through all the seasons, and God says, man, you stayed consistent, knowing what I showed you. All right, now I'm going to elevate you to go work you're going to work in the NFL. You're going to be repping Braun down. And this Bible, you see this because Pharaoh's asking if there's any special workers, give them to me so they can work for me as well. What we take in conclusion on that point is, and granted, I don't want people to take this and say, well, let me work hard so I can serve a king. No, wrong motive. I'm not working hard.
It's just all those points just for you to take that.
That's a byproduct. It's a byproduct of you working hard. Yeah, you might work hard and you never serve a king. That doesn't mean the Bible.
You gotta be okay with that.
Gotta be okay with that.
It doesn't mean the Bible lied. It's just it wasn't in God's will for you to serve a king. But the reality is, if you serve well, you hone in on your gifts, you maximize them out, there's a good chance you can serve someone of value. And I believe that. And we see it with the story of Joseph, and now his brothers are going to get that same chance. So what we make on that point is, If God is giving you something to do, whether, like Max said, it's artwork, whether it's engineering, it's real estate, whether it's serving as an usher at a local church, do it like you're doing it for God, and don't do it for the benefits you can get out of it. But do understand, as a byproduct, benefits can come from it. Benefits can come from it. And I love the story of Joseph, how because he honed in, there comes a situation where he's needed. See, that's the thing when you hone in. Oh man, it's like you think about Ray Allen,
It's fulfilling.
right? For Ray Allen, he's leaving Boston. The Heat really just need like a fourth man who can smack threes. And Ray Allen, all his life, he's smacking the threes, smack. And at the proper
meets reality.
season,
Opportunity meets preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah.
And then Ray Allen is exactly what the Heat need. And then he's the one who takes us. He saves the day. This is exactly what we brought you in, Ray Allen. Make threes, 3 and D. And he shows up and does it because he mastered a skill. And what I've learned is when you master a skill, there's gonna come a day and time that God will ordain. Because you've mastered this thing I put in your hands, I will ordain a day, David. I will ordain a day, David, when Goliath is taunting the people of Israel, David. I'm going to ordain a day because you protected David protected sheep. He put his life at risk for sheep.
And that goes back to our point. He wasn't doing it for fame or for to be king. This is just his job that he was taking serious.
I'm taking it very serious.
That's just what he was doing.
You know how many people would have said, I ain't about to risk my life for some sheep, but he took his job that serious. No, they put me in charge of the sheep. Win, lose, or draw, whether I gotta die, I gotta protect the sheep. And because you have that mentality to
now he could go to war for his people.
Now an opportunity comes, and you're the only person, David, who will go fight that guy. You're the only guy because you maximize what I asked you to do. And this is why, man, I tell people, man, you gotta get in a relationship with God. Because if you're not in a relationship with God, you won't work hard. I remember,
I think
go ahead.
True. I was gonna say, no, I think it goes back to do everything as if you were doing it for the Lord.
For God.
And
100%.
Don't do it for people, because people always, like, when you get pissed off, you're not gonna want to do it.
Exactly. It's like it's not consistent. It's like when you're happy with your boss, maybe you're gonna go 110%, but then when he pisses you off, you're gonna go 50%.
Exactly.
And it's like, dude, that you're not getting all you're supposed to get out of it. So like when God is the one consistent person that you can do things for, like he's always gonna be the same. So like win, lose, or draw, if you do things as if it's onto him, it's so fulfilling to see the skills you get and seeing it used in another season, bro. That's a fulfilling. Like David, bro, like the slingshot, like who would have thought? Like I think he didn't even know. Like, dude, I'm not gonna use a slingshot in Goliath, but I think he was spirit like, what can I do? They try to give him armor. He's like, no.
Yeah, he's like, that's not me.
You know what I'm saying? He's like, that's not me. I'm gonna do what I do, and it worked. So like, that's what you see is like, if you serve faithfully, the way you do things will fit in a perfect puzzle that was meant for you. You know what I'm saying? But if you half work everything only for benefits or whatever, you really won't ever get to your calling, I think, because like if David would have, not did everything with his best efforts, I don't think he would have, got to, defeat Goliath.
He would not have been prepared.
Right. And then he probably wouldn't have been good at the harp, playing in the king's palace. You know what I'm saying?
Everything.
Stuff like that. So all that comes to just, man, put your best foot forward, man. It's an opportunity. Don't look at compensation. It comes with it, man.
And I want to make a point, because we are reading in the Old Testament, and I know if my dad were here, he'd tell me I got to bring it in the new. You got to bring the old and the new. Show us it in the new, and I will. So we read the verse in Proverbs that talks about, do you see any competent workers? They will serve kings, right? So now in the story in the Old Testament, you know, Pharaoh's a king, but in the New Testament, Jesus is the King of Kings, right? And if you look at the guys Jesus chose, you look at Peter, you look at Matthew, you look at Paul, these
That's
dudes,
good. That's right.
Talented.
what people
That's
miss,
so.
is
That's
the,
right.
the Pharisees are like, these are sinners, but Jesus, it wasn't about, Jesus isn't worried about that. Jesus is like, listen, you, you
He's
guys
like a
got to catch it.
recruiter.
You got it. You got to see it.
Talented.
Jesus is like, okay, if I have an encounter with Paul, if I have an encounter with Matthew, because I'm gonna go chill with Matthew, I'm gonna do the fish thing with Peter. These guys will love me, and if I could just have their heart, these guys have mastered their skill. And it applies even in the new. Jesus, see, I'm at a mindset, Max, where I say people don't understand this fact. Not even Jesus likes a lazy person. Not saying Jesus won't die. He died for a lazy person too. But when you're talking about who does Jesus want to work for him, Jesus doesn't, he's not worried that this guy was a sinner. You were a sinner too, you Pharisee. But this dude, he's a sinner, but his work ethic, my God, if he just gets in the word, I will transform him, but he's coming with work ethic. This is why I always say,
you hit it. Because
this
look
is
at
why-
Paul, bro.
this is
Paul
why-
Yeah,
is
let him
the
finish the
total
point. Let him finish the
opposite
point.
of the spectrum.
because
He's
this
like,
is
dog,
why-
I need you on my team. Because like
but this is-
it's like you're recruiting off of like another person's team. Like, nah, I gotta take your best player, bro. Like when
you have to see that with Jesus is it translates in the New Testament that if you work hard to be a tax collector, the Bible says Zacchaeus was a keyword notorious tax collector. That means he mastered the skill of robbing people's money. That's a skill. Whether you want to say it's a skill to be able to twist numbers, and that's a skill. Say what you want. That's a skill. And he became rich because he was great at what he did. And Jesus recognized you guys are all seeing the bad in it. But what I'm saying is, if you can have that same skill set or that same mentality for doing my work, you'll be on another level. And this is what people have to understand. Not even Jesus is looking to hire someone who's. That's why in the story of the parable with the talents, what happened when God gave? He gave 1 5, he gave 1 2, and 1 1. The guy who doesn't do anything with the one, God's like, you lazy servant, get him out of here.
Yeah.
God's not. He doesn't even want a lazy servant. And this is what people have to understand. Because Stanley and me were having a conversation, Matt, and he was talking about how he had watched this thing about this magician guy who was doing magic and the NBA thing, and basically we know it's voodoo, but his thing is, yo, like these guys that serve the devil have power, but like we don't have power. But I said, you want to know why we don't have power, Max? Because I'm at a point now, God has made me get it, Max, in this sense. I'll give you the power, but that verse applies. Do you see any competent workers? They'll serve king. You want to be able to cast out demons. You want to be able to touch this person who can't walk and they walk. Well, you better get in God's lab. Read your Bible, pray every day, do the thing God is asking you to do in season, and don't do it like Stanley said. If you have a bad day, I don't feel like doing. No, if he said evangelize on a good day, on a bad day, evangelize. If he said, yo, Max, lead your family well, I understand your wife's pissing you off, but lead your family well. The problem is we won't do the little thing that God's asking us to do, but we want power. Get out of here. Do you understand? For Paul's handkerchiefs to be able to touch someone and they get healed, that power is not going to be given to just anybody. You have to be willing to put in the work. And the reality is a lot of Christians, they won't put in the work in terms of just simply spend time with God. Simply do the thing God has asked you to do and master it in season. And if you would do that, just like we see in the Old Testament, God would elevate you. You'd go from someone who was a deacon in the church to someone who's now a pastor, to someone who God says, you know what? I'm going to put you as an evangelist. You're going to go around the world and preach with power like Philip. But the reality is that Bible verse applies in the old as we see it here, but it also applies in the new. Because what the Bible says is Jesus asked Peter, its owner, the boat's owner, which tells us Peter owned a boat. To own a boat means you were doing something right. You know what I mean? Paul was a Pharisee at the highest level. You were doing something right. Zacchaeus was a notorious tax collector. You were doing something right to become that great. So the reality is even Jesus went looking for people with repentant hearts, but who, not just anyone with a repentant heart, people who had great skill sets at what they were good at. And that's why he tells Peter, you're going to be a fisher of men now. I'm going to use every bit of that skill set you got. Every bit of it.
That's true, man. That's 100% true. That's very interesting to see, like, you know, how God, he needs talent too.
Ha.
He needs there, you know, it's not like obviously he can use the people that aren't, you know, all famous, and like he uses the people that are looked over, like David. He was small, but he still had skill. You know what I'm saying? Like he uses the you know, he kind of goes unorthodox in a way to prove his point that he's powerful, but he still requires skill from what he's using. So
Work
like
ethic.
exactly. And that's the main thing you start to see is like, you know, if you want God to use you, put
Work ethic. You gotta have
you
work
gotta work in
because
the season when no one's looking.
being a pastor requires you to work hard. Being an apostle requires you to work hard. Being a prophet requires you to work hard. Being an evangelist. So if you want to work for God, but you won't even work for your boss at Walmart, you're in the wrong business. Because God says you don't even, the guy asks you to get cards and you're groaning, oh man, this guy. If that's the attitude you have for a boss at Walmart, what are you going to say when God says, yo, I need you to get on a plane and go to Africa to go pray for an individual? God, you want me to miss the Super Bowl to go pray for someone in Africa? Are you crazy? You see my point? You don't have the right mindset. Your work ethic is lack thereof. You have to be willing to serve in season, out of season with the right mindset, like Joseph. And if you do that consistently, whether you get elevated or not, believe me, an opportunity to elevation will come your way.
That's 100% right. So after that, we see that Jacob blesses Pharaoh. What does it say? And he's lived up to this point 130 years.
I think
I like
that
the
point, it just goes.
go ahead.
It goes back to just that overflow. Pharaoh's being well compensated by by um by Joseph's arrival. Not only is he getting great workers, he's getting the services of Joseph's ability to prophesy. Now he's getting the blessings of the father. So like, man, ever since Joseph came into his life, he's nonstop benefit.
Mhm.
I like the wording that it says in Genesis 47 verses 9. The days of the years of my pilgrimage. Okay, in this version it says pilgrimage, but in our version here it says I have traveled this earth for 130 years, but my life has been short compared to the lives of my ancestors. I think the thing that I like about that wording is he says I've traveled this earth 130 years. So if he says he's traveled this earth, what that tells me is this is not the last stop, meaning this isn't the final destination. You hear what I'm trying to get you to see there? He's traveled this earth 130 years, but we know that earth is not the last destination. It's not the last destination. That's all I want to emphasize there. He's traveled, meaning us being on earth is a pit stop. That's the point I'm just trying to make. We're traveling through, but this isn't the final stop. It's not the final destination. I think it's something we always have to remember, that everything we're doing now, you're going to see an investment. You're going to see the return of the investment you made in your time traveling earth in the next life. And some people, like I said, if this book is all false, then I'm going to be the crazy guy that just believed it and there's nothing on the other side. But if I'm not crazy and this book is legit and we are just traveling and there is another side, well, everything you're doing in the now is actually an investment for the other side because you're just traveling through this side. So just keep that in mind. Everything you're doing, understand there's an investment you're making, whether good or bad, because you're simply traveling. And if you're traveling somewhere, that lets me know there's another place that awaits us. And so just keep that in mind, that we are temporary residents of this earth.
That is very true. I see that. And it looks like Jacob blessed Pharaoh once again before leaving the courts. And then you see the favor of Joseph just trickling down to his father and his brothers once again, by giving them the best land of Egypt. And they settled there just as Pharaoh commanded.
Mm.
Let's see. You guys see anything else here?
No, I'm good.
All right, so we'll continue to the next section.
Joseph's leadership in the famine. Meanwhile, the famine became so severe that all the food was used up, and people were starving throughout the lands of Egypt and Canaan. By selling grain to the people, Joseph eventually collected all the money in Egypt and Canaan, and he put the money in Pharaoh's treasury. When the people of Egypt and Canaan ran out of money, all the Egyptians came to Joseph. "Our money is gone," they cried, "but please give us food, or we will die before your very eyes." Joseph replied, "Since your money is gone, bring me your livestock. I will give you food in exchange for your livestock." So they brought their livestock to Joseph in exchange for food, in exchange for their horses, flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle and donkeys. Joseph provided them with food for another year. But that year ended, and the next year they came again and said, "We cannot hide the truth from you, my lord. Our money is gone, and all our livestock and cattle are yours. We have nothing left to give but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your very eyes? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We offer our land and ourselves as slaves for Pharaoh. Just give us grain so we may live and not die, and so the land does not become empty and desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold him their fields because the famine was so severe, and soon all the land belonged to Pharaoh. As for the people, he made them all slaves, from one end of Egypt to the other. The only land he did not buy was the land belonging to the priests. They received an allotment of food directly from Pharaoh, so they didn't need to sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Look, today I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh. I will provide you with seed so you can plant the fields. Then, when you harvest it, 1/5 of your crop will belong to Pharaoh. You may keep the remaining 4/5 as seed for your fields and as food for you, your households, and your little ones." "You have saved our lives," they exclaimed. "May it please you, my lord, to let us be Pharaoh's servants." Joseph then issued a decree, still in effect in the land of Egypt, that Pharaoh should receive 1/5 of all the crops grown on his land. Only the land belonging to the priests was not given to Pharaoh. Meanwhile, the people of Israel settled in the region of Goshen in Egypt. There they acquired property, and they were fruitful, and their population grew rapidly. Jacob lived for 17 years after his arrival in Egypt, so he lived 147 years in all. As the time of his death drew near, Jacob called for his son Joseph and said to him, "Please do me this favor. Put your hand under my thigh and swear that you will treat me with unfailing love by honoring this last request. Do not bury me in Egypt. When I die, please take my body out of Egypt and bury me with my ancestors." So Joseph promised, "I will do as you ask." "Swear that you will do it," Jacob insisted. So Joseph gave his oath, and Jacob bowed humbly at the head of his bed.
So we see here, this is going to contribute to the Exodus. So, so the people are starving, and they're selling their property, and they sell themselves eventually. So they lose all their equity. But it says the Jewish people were purchasing property. Verse 27, the people of Israel settled in the region of Goshen in Egypt. There they acquired property, and they were fruitful, and population grew rapidly. So while the Egyptians are losing equity, the people of Israel are growing in equity and prosperity and population. And that's going to ultimately threaten the new king. And I'll just read this from Exodus 1, verse 8. It says, "Eventually a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, 'Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if a war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us, then they will escape from the country, and the Egyptian king being threatened is what caused the exodus. So God is just doing jumping jacks on how he's working this out. So he has to make the people of Egypt lose equity so the people of Israel can grow, and then later the Egyptian king will be threatened and kick them out, because that's a part of God's plan to get them to the promised land.
That's good. That's good. And also, this is an illustration of what's going to happen in the end with Jesus, humbling all his authorities under God. Because, I mean, humbling all his authorities and then handing the authority back to God. Because you're going to see in this famine, everyone is forced to sell themselves, except for the Israelites, who we are the Israelites, those of us who have faith. We are the Israelites in the new covenant. But you're going to see that everyone else they end up having to sell themselves. They end up having nothing. And basically they have to submit to whatever Joseph's going to tell them. So Joseph, in a sense, makes Pharaoh have charge of everybody based on what happens here. Joseph puts everything under Pharaoh, because people, it's a famine. It's Joseph's command or nothing, whatever he says. So everyone is now under the command of Joseph, and now he puts everything under Pharaoh. He takes everything from these people in the sense of themselves. They sell themselves, and because if you remember earlier, they had to sell. I mean, they had to buy, but then now they don't have any more money to buy, and then ultimately they have to sell themselves, and now they become slaves. And then now Joseph has turned everything under the care of Pharaoh. And now if you see that in the New Testament symmetrically, because it's a story, like I said, it's a story really about Jesus and how it's going to happen in the end. It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, starting at verses, I'll start at 21. It says, so you see, just as death came into the world to a man, now the resurrection from the dead has begun to another man. Just as everyone dies because we all belong to Adam, everyone who belongs to Christ will be given new life. But there is an order to this resurrection. Christ was raised as the first of the harvest. Then all who belong to Christ will be raised when he comes back. After that, the end will come when he will turn, here it is, the kingdom over to God, the Father, having destroyed every ruler and authority and power. For Christ must reign until he humbles all his enemies beneath his feet. And the last enemy to be destroyed is death. For the scriptures say God has put all things under his authority. Of course, when it says all things are under his authority, that does not include God himself, who gave Christ his authority. Then when all things are under his authority, the Son will put himself under God's authority. So God, who gave his Son authority over all things, will be utterly supreme over everything and everything everywhere. So you see, Pharaoh would represent God, while Joseph represents Jesus. And Pharaoh put Joseph, everyone had to bow to Joseph. Joseph was in charge of everyone, but he wasn't in charge of Pharaoh. And you're going to see in this story, Joseph's going to turn everybody, into the care of Pharaoh, if that makes sense. And it's symmetrical of what happens in the end when Jesus comes. He's going to humble all his enemies, and the last enemy to be humbled is death. And then he's going to give the authority back to God. And in a sense, you see Joseph does the same exact thing in this story. And it's funny because Max made another point, which is so crazy how you can look in this and see so many different points, because it connects to exactly what you just said, with God allowing the Israelites to have the prosperity, but it was part of his divine plan for the next guy, Pharaoh, to show up in Exodus. And that's going to be the very reason why he has problems with the Israelites. So even in this, you can see all of that, which is why it's proof this is a spiritual book, because you can see 10 different things in one story. Okay.
And one thing I want to ask you guys, so like the grain that is being sold to the people by Joseph, are they planting that?
No, remember you have to go back to the dream. Pharaoh had a dream. He saw 7 cows that were big. They were eaten by 7 skinny cows. Joseph interprets the dream and says the 7 fat cows represent 7 years of great prosperity, while the seven scrawny cows, they represent 7 bad years. And so right now they're within that 7 years of famine right now. So if you remember what Joseph's divine plan was, he said in the years of prosperity, He said, since there will be so much, there will be an abundance. He said to store some away so that in the 7 years of famine, the stuff they had stored away was now going to be an investment that is now that's that grain. This is the grain that they're harvesting. This is the grain they had already harvested that they saved. You see that? And that goes back to the ants that Proverbs talked about. How you see any ants, the ants, they work during the summer. So that way in the winter, they have enough. Because in the winter, they're not going to be able to come out. They have to hibernate in the winter. But they work extra hard in the summertime so that when wintertime comes, they have enough food and hibernation to sustain them for the wintertime. But that's where this grain is coming from.
So they had to they basically gave it, and then now they have to buy it back from.
No, they didn't give it. I don't think you're understanding. They didn't give it. In the 7 years of prosperity, Stanley, it's as if let's say God says, okay, Stan, you have a revelation. God tells you, Stanley, for the next 7 years, you're gonna make $1 million a year. But then after those 7 years, fam, you're gonna make freaking $10,000 a year. In the 7 years that you were making $1 million, it's your own money. So what I'm saying is when Pharaoh and Joseph and Pharaoh's household, for these 7 great years, their household was the one that was getting abundance. Not everybody, their household. And that's why Pharaoh,
of their abundance, they saved.
exactly. And now everyone has to come to Pharaoh because he's the only one. Because you have to think about it. The reason we know that with such accuracy is, who did God give the dream to Pharaoh? Joseph interpreted the dream and told it to, it was Pharaoh's dream interpreted by Joseph for Pharaoh. And that's why it was a divine plan. Only Joseph can interpret it. And Joseph now is in charge of the house. So while this is the reason why you have to learn about preserving, because you're going to see that in the 7 years of abundance, only Pharaoh's household is preserving, because Joseph said, he interpreted the dream. He said, yo, there's going to be 7 bad years. While we're making this abundance, let's save. While everyone else who was making abundance, they're living lavish, we don't got to save. And then it backfires on them in the end. And now they have nothing and they have to go to Pharaoh. It's divine. It's a divine plan from God. Because now they done washed up all their abundance, not thinking there was going to be 7 bad years. But Joseph, because he's a prophet and God reveals to him and allows him to have an understanding of what was coming, he allowed Pharaoh's household that was making abundance to store some away. And now everyone has to come to him. Does that make sense? And I want to get the Bible verse so that way you see that interpretation that Joseph gave to Pharaoh. You're going to see that in Genesis chapter 41. So let's go there really quick so we can read that part. That part. Okay. So I want you to read it and start at verses. We can think of that 33 is good.
You're on Genesis 41.
Genesis 41, yeah.
It says, therefore, Pharaoh.
Start at 28. Start at 28.
It says, this will happen just as I have described it, for God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt, but afterward there will be 7 years of famine, so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God and will soon make them happen. Therefore, Pharaoh should have an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land, let them collect. All right, so then, okay. This is what I think it is. The Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. I think when I read that part, I was more like they were getting crop from everybody in the land. But I guess
the parts of the land that were producing, because Pharaoh's king, the parts that are producing there. But I want you to finish that. Finish that little portion.
But I just want to, like, do you guys see it that way? Like, is it 1/5 of just the Pharaoh stuff?
No, it's all of the land. Go ahead.
It's the whole land.
So that means if I had land, he has the right to come take 1/5 of my crops, right? Or no?
I don't see it like that. It's like,
that's how I saw it. That's why I was kind of thinking.
Let me read verse 48. It says, during those years, Joseph gathered all the crops grown in Egypt and stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities.
Exactly.
So it says all of Egypt and the surrounding cities.
So I would assume that was people have land in Egypt.
But but you have to look at it like this. You and me live somewhere, but there are places where you live right now it's occupied by the government. Like if you see this spots around your house, there's certain places that are occupied by the government in every part of the world. There's not every portion of land everywhere someone owns it. There's certain places the government owns that house, the government owns that field, the government owns that farm. So the reality is when you think about all the land, that's how, now granted, that's how I interpret it, but I don't interpret it like I can just go to Stanley's house if I'm the king. And it's because even with the story of Ahab and Jezebel, Ahab, who was the king, he had to ask the guy to buy his field, and the guy said no. And then Jezebel said, all right, we're going to kill him and take his land. So just because you were king doesn't give you the right to just go to someone's field and say, give me this food. So that's out of order. So I don't see it that way. Because of that story, King Ahab killed the guy because the guy had the right to say, no, you can't. I'm not selling you my vineyard. It's been in the
No,
family.
that makes sense because what happens in verse 47 where they have to come to the king to get stuff from them because they've
And then
already
you have
exhausted
to also
theirs.
think about his brothers come. He says, put them in the best land that Egypt had. Does that mean there were people living there and he said, get out of there and put his brothers? No, there's certain parts of the land that people weren't living there. You have to, because the king said, put your brothers and relatives in the best part of the land of Egypt. And clearly there was a place in Goshen and these other parts because Joseph put them there. But I don't believe he kicked the people out and then put his brothers there. That land was available. So there's parts of the land everywhere that some of it's not for someone, because I just don't believe that they're going to just knock on your door and say, well, we're taking 1/5.
So,
I don't.
so this is another thing I saw is like, at this point, the famine is still on, right?
It's still
I
on.
would assume that the soil can't be planted on. So
Nope.
now I'm seeing he's giving them seeds to go plant.
Where are you seeing this?
Verse 23. Then Joseph said to the people, look, today I have brought you and your land for Pharaoh. I will provide you with seeds so you can plant the fields. Then when you harvest it, 1/5 of your crop will belong to Pharaoh. You may keep the remaining 4/5 as seeds for your field. So I guess at this point, the fields are starting to be able to harvest now. I'm assuming this is at the end of the 7 years.
This is probably at the end of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. That's how I see it.
Or maybe at the tail end of it.
Yeah, tail end where the soil's starting to pick up again.
Yeah, because they're hungry because there's a famine. They can't grow anything. And
Right.
then they sell their livestock and there's still a famine. And
And
they sell their fields and there's still a famine. They sell themselves and there's still a fammin.
and then at
maybe
some
at
point
the
it
tail
ends.
end, he's like, it's about to end, so I'll give you this, and then maybe when it ends, then they're able to grow the crops. But I mean, that's details.
The reason why I look at it like that is because if you go back to what you just read in Genesis chapter 41, why I believe what you guys both said is correct, it would have been towards the end, because during famine there was going to be no planting, because that's what God said when Joseph interpreted the dream. Go back to Genesis chapter 41 and read where is it at? Yeah, if you read verses 30, that's the biblical evidence that there's no way they would have been able to plant during the famine because of the interpretation of the dream.
Yeah, it says, but afterward there will be 7 years of famine so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. Yeah.
Famine would destroy the land. So if famine is destroying the land, you can't plant on the land if famine is
Nobody could
destroying the
plant.
land.
Yeah, it would have happened. They would have everything would have happened in the last thing. Right at the end of the famine would have been them being given seed, and then the famine would be done, and then they would start growing it, and then the prosperity of
But
the
at
people
that point,
of
they already
Israel would
sold
start growing
everything.
too.
And
So
they've
they're
already
already-
sold everything. You see that?
Yeah.
Strategy.
Exactly, and that's maybe the point.
Yeah.
God does it for a certain amount, and then once they sold everything, He gets rid of the famine.
Right. It was like a purpose to it.
And I think this also goes back to a point of competent workers. Because when you look at Joseph, my goodness, it's a story that it always gets me. This guy's work ethic from the time he was working for his father to Potiphar to the warden to Pharaoh, his work ethic grew, it grew, it grew, and then his impact. Because that's the thing you have to understand. When your work ethic grows, your impact in whatever you're doing will be great. So when Bron says, you know what, I'm going to work on my defense, I'm going to work on free throws, I'm going to work on layups, I'm going to work on threes, because you've honed in on your skill set, you have a greater impact on the game. And Joseph, he's honed in on his skills, and you're going to see now in famine, he's having a great impact. So I think in conclusion, that's what we see there is, when you work hard, you will be able to have an impact, a substantial amount of impact in a company, in a household, in a family, in a generation, because you took no days off. You put the work and you let the Spirit lead you. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. So were we on
Yeah, we would stop there because I think time.
okay.
Yeah,
So
I think we covered everything. Except at the end of it, obviously, Jacob tells Joseph
Oh
to
yeah.
bury him with his ancestors. Remember, Abraham buys a tomb for his wife. He's buried there. Isaac's buried there. Jacob wants to be buried there, and he will be buried there.
And then it goes back to a promise. Is when you make a promise, you got to keep the promise.
gotta
And
keep it.
they
You gotta-
will keep the promise because a promise binds you. An oath
Mhm.
binds you. So when you make a vow, an oath, a promise, which are all the same thing, it binds you.
100%.
That's pretty much it.
Cool. So hold on. Wait, where's the stop button?